This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Check out Squarespace through the link in the description below. More about them in a bit. Our destination today is the embodiment of perfect classical proportions applied to the performance arts. It is a masterpiece of acoustic science, inspiring awe in spectators, performers, and academics. It is also the best preserved of all ancient Greek theatres. This is the great theatre of Epidaurus in the southwest of Greece, a massive open-air venue that could host more than 14,000 spectators. Epidaurus was the site of two theatres, a little theatre which could seat about 2,000, as well as the Great Theatre. If you search for the Theatre Epidaurus, you may find results relating to both locations. But it's the large theatre that deserves the headlines. This was an integral part of the shrine and rites dedicated to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, whose worship was vital to the city of Epidaurus. The city of Epidaurus was located on the Argolid plain of the East Peloponnese region in Greece. It was inhabited since Neolithic times, although it first flourished in the 12th century BC thanks to a thriving harbour. The site was blessed with a mild climate and natural springs, features which linked the city to the attributes of health and recovery. That's why locals always preferred to worship deities with healing powers. First Meleatus, then Apollo, and finally his son Asclepius, god of medicine, believed to be born on the nearby Mount Tithion. Asclepius was the undisputed patron of Epidaurus from the 5th century BC to the 4th century AD. Worshippers of his cult founded a sanctuary, the Asclepion, which was visited by patients from all over Greece and the Mediterranean. Patients sought relief from their many ailments, including mental health conditions. Healing practices took a variety of forms. Initially, patients expected divine intervention through the mediation of the resident priests. In later times, priests developed more advanced medical skills and were able to develop medicines by using herbs. Sometimes they even extracted small quantities of venom from snakes. Because of this, the snake is often depicted next to Asclepius. The cult of Asclepius received a massive boost after 430 BC, the first year of the Plague of Athens, which was present from 430 to 426 BC. It was an epidemic outbreak which killed a quarter of Athenians, all while they were besieged by Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. Worshippers flocked to the shrine, filling its coffers with their donations. The Asclepians were able to expand operations, erecting an impressive complex of buildings, sponsoring art projects, and organizing a festival held every 4 years to celebrate sports and performing arts. The theatre was certainly used as a venue for poetry and musical competitions of the festival, but its use may predate such festivities. The theatre was probably first used to host some of the rites to Asclepius, including communal prayers, songs, or even sacrifices. Eventually, it began to be used directly by patients to praise the gods. It was a common practice to thank Asclepius by composing odes to him or by organizing literary competitions, both to be performed at the theatre. A physician named Galen of Pergamon wrote in the 2nd century AD that Asclepius, or rather his priests, often prescribed for patients to write, compose, and perform as a path to recovery. During the Hellenistic period, 323 BC to 31 BC, and especially after the Roman occupation, the sanctuary of Asclepius became a sort of spa town, offering leisure activities in addition to prayer and medicine. Gradually, the theatre enlarged its repertoire to include tragedies and comedies to entertain patients and visitors alike. In 395 AD, the sanctuary was the backdrop to a real-life tragedy when it was sacked and destroyed by the Goths. Some 30 years later, Emperor Theodosius II definitively closed the site, along with other pagan sanctuaries. Ancient Epidaurus survived for another century until the population abandoned the city following two earthquakes in 522 and 551 AD. This is likely the time when the theatre was buried under layers of earth and silt, a long intermission before its return to the limelight. The theatre was located about half a kilometre to the southeast of the main sanctuary of Asclepius. It was built between 360 BC and 330 BC on the west side of Mount Kinortio, as part of a general reconstruction of the shrine. According to Greek traveller and chronicler Pausanias, its architect was the famous sculptor Polykleitos, but this artist actually lived in the second half of the 5th century BC, so Pausanias may have been referring to a descendant. The theatre presents the three main features common to all classical Greek auditoria: the orchestra, a circular space used as the main stage in classic times; the skene, or stage building, a 1 or 2 story building initially used as a backdrop, and later as a main stage in the Hellenistic and Roman periods; and finally, the cavea, or auditorium, usually semicircular in shape with ascending rows of seats. The orchestra is a perfect circle about 20 meters in diameter. Its foundation was made of beaten earth and was surrounded in white limestone. At the center of the orchestra is a white circular stone, which may have had a practical use, as we'll see later. Alternatively, it may have been a ceremonial altar used to honor Dionysus. After all, everybody does love wine. The orchestra also had a drainage channel, which prevented rainwater from the cavea flooding the performance area. At the back of the orchestra, there stood the skene. Unfortunately, only the foundations of the original structure survive today. The skene was probably supported by pillars fitted with groves so that painted scenery panels could be slid into place by stagehands. This suggests a use of the skene as a backdrop to the main action. During the Hellenistic period, a second level was added to the skene along with ramps on each side. Both additions suggest that in this period, the structure was used more frequently as a stage itself rather than just the scenery to the orchestra. A 2-story skene was used to stage conventional comedies and tragedies, which were in vogue in Athens. So this addition may imply the shift in repertoire that I mentioned earlier, the purpose of the theatre changing from honouring Asclepius to performing standard plays for ailing patients. These eager spectators would have crowded the third architectural element, the cavea. The cavea at Epidaurus is nestled into the northern slope of Mount Kinortio, and it follows a slightly elliptical ground plan, 118 meters in diameter, which envelops part of the orchestra. The hug of the auditorium is not a sufficient one, though. The first rows of seats are slightly pushed back, so as to leave a corridor for spectators to leave more quickly and efficiently. The seating area consists of 2 sections separated by a semicircular aisle. The lower section has 34 rows of benches, while the upper tier has a further 21. This upper tier was probably added in the second development phase during the Hellenistic period. This addition coincided with the building of the 2-storied skene. An interesting feature of the upper rows is that they do not follow the same incline as the lower ones, angled at 26 degrees with respect to the orchestra. The upper seats are inclined at a steeper angle, a clever measure which allows the audience in the last row to have a full view of the stage, not blocked by the heads of other spectators. So, tall people in the audience, I guess some things never change. Another clever touch was applied to the individual seats, or rather benches. They are hollowed beneath the edge so that they present a wedge-like section. This allowed spectators to find more comfortable seating positions and tuck their feet under the seats to let other people walk by. In total, the cavea could seat between 14,000 and 14,500 spectators, the farthest of which would be sitting 60 meters from the orchestra. Now, speaking of measurements, an analysis published in the American Journal of Archaeology in 1926 by Andrew Fossum highlights how certain numbers recur within the measurements and architectural features of the theatre. He noted, for example, that the measurements of key architectural features all appear to be multiples of 35 centimeters, which is the radius of the large circular stone placed in the center of the orchestra. Fossum speculates that 35 centimeters may have been the equivalent of the standard foot or standard unit of measure in use at Epidaurus. Hence, the architect placed the circular stone at the center of the orchestra as a constant point of reference. There doesn't appear to be an occult or esoteric reason behind the use of these recurring numbers. It simply makes good architectural sense. This practice ensures proportion, harmony, and symmetry are preserved throughout this large building. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Polykleitos, or whoever built the theatre, did not have otherworldly considerations in mind. Author George Pantazis at the National Technical University of Athens has analysed the astronomical orientation of the theatre of Epidaurus in relation to topography and Greek mythology. He found that the main axis of the theatre meets the Sagittarius constellation in the period from June the 22nd to July the 21st. This is when the main festival of Asclepius was celebrated. Pantazis goes on to explain that the Sagittarius constellation represents the centaur Chiron. According to mythology, the centaur learned medicine from Apollo and Artemis and later taught it to Asclepius. During other times of the year, the theatre's axis also coincides with the constellation of Ophiuchus, which is said to represent the holy snake of Asclepius. The researcher points out that the architect of the theatre considered earthly considerations as well. For example, the main axis avoided an east-west orientation so that audiences would not get the sun straight in their eyes, neither at dawn nor at sunset. And finally, the cavea was placed so that the audience could enjoy the spectacular views of the surrounding countryside. The theatre continued to be used for decades, even after the Romans extended their dominion over the area. But inevitably, it fell into disuse as Rome hit its twilight and the cavea and orchestra were buried under layers of earth and silt. The skein, instead, was left exposed, and it succumbed to weathering. The monument was brought back to light only in 1881 by the excavations of archaeologist Pangiottis Cavadius. Restoration work was carried out in 1907 and from 1954 to 1963. To the delight of scholars, the earth and silt had almost perfectly preserved the structures of this ancient marvel. Today, the theatre at Epidaurus is considered the best preserved theatre in all of Greece. Now, just before we get into the rest of today's video, a word from today's sponsor, Squarespace. Look, it's the new year, and maybe your New Year's resolution is to start a new business or a blog or a podcast or a website. Well, fortunately, Squarespace gives you every possible tool you might need to make your dream into a reality, whether it's a small business, that sports blog, a creative portfolio, or maybe you just want to share some of the dankest of memes. It doesn't matter. If you can dream it, you can build it with Squarespace. You're looking to get in and out quick without thinking too much? Well, use one of their quick, beautiful templates to make a website that's fresh and for you. Or maybe you're a bit more hands-on, you want to tinker with the design and colors. Well, Squarespace has tons of customization options to make that possible, and you never have to worry about any technical nonsense. Once you're done setting up your website, just playing with the colors or customizing it heavily, well, there's a lot of extra features that Squarespace have so your site can thrive. Email campaigns, patronage portals, social integrations, member-only areas, analytics, commercial options, 24/7 customer support. Boy, does the list go on. So when you're ready to get started on the next project of yours, big or small, it involves a website, do it with Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch on your site, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% of your first purchase of a website or a domain. And back to today's video. Since 1954, the theatre has started to welcome drama and musical performances again. Some of these are penned by contemporary authors, but most are a revival of ancient repertoires. As we heard earlier, the use of the theatre of Epidaurus was linked to celebrations and rites in honor of the god Asclepius. So performances in ancient times evolved from religious ceremonies. This is a pattern common to all theatres in classical Greece, which may have evolved from the lyrical performances of epic poetry or from rituals celebrating the god Dionysus. One of these ceremonies, involving masks, songs, and the sacrifice of goats, was called the Tragedia, the origin of the word tragedy. When the theatre at Epidaurus started hosting non-religious performances in the Hellenistic period, spectators could expect two types of plays, either tragedies or comedies. Tragedies were almost always inspired by Greek mythology, and plots involved the resolution of complex moral dilemmas, or the lack thereof. Very often these dilemmas were unwinnable for tragic heroes, and the plays ended in violence. Lots of violence, actually, which was actually not allowed on stage. The death of a character was usually heard off stage or announced by another character. For example, in Euripides' Medea, the title character poisons her rivals, Glauce and Chiron, but their demise is never seen, only announced by a messenger. Early tragedies relied on only one actor, a limitation later expanded to a maximum of 3. They were strictly male and would impersonate several characters, including deities, with the use of costumes, platform shoes, and masks. As we'll see later, these devices were also helpful in projecting their voice to the final rows. The actors interacted with the Coryphaeus, or leader of the chorus. This was a group of up to 15 performers, also all male. The chorus did not act or speak in the modern sense, but they did dance and sing to provide commentary to the action. According to stage director and choral expert Jacques Lecoq, Greek choruses took on different formations: the circle, the triangle, or the rectangle. The latter was probably the most popular, as it allowed for more internal fluidity, or the capability of the chorus members to split into smaller groups who acted as opposing factions before merging again to address the audience. The evolution of the chorus and stagecraft in general was driven by the most successful and influential playwrights, most notably Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus was the one to add a second actor and introduce the concept of sequels with his trilogy Oedipus. Sophocles introduced the third actor and the use of painted scenery. Euripides popularized the habit of breaking the fourth wall by posing thought-provoking questions to the audience and increased the number of choristers to 15. If you found yourself attending comedy at Epidaurus, you would enjoy the performance of as many as 24 chorus performers. The first part of the show was the Parodos. This is when the chorus erupted into the orchestra, performing song and dance routines. The performers usually wore excessive and ridiculous costumes, bees with huge stingers flying, roosters with giant phalluses, or even kitchen utensils. The second act was the Agon, a witty, humorous dialogue amongst the main characters which drove the plot. This led to the Parabasis, in which the chorus directly addressed the audience. Choristers would then launch into the Exodos, a grand finale featuring another song and dance number. Like any other genre, Greek comedy had its star writers and innovators. The best known is Aristophanes, who used his work to satirize contemporary events and personalities, including powerful politicians and fellow artists. The baton of comedy genius was picked up by Menander, who introduced staple characters and plot elements which were picked up by Roman theatre and are still in use today. The romantic lead, the cunning servant, mistaken identities, a twist at the end of the story. That's all Menander. Now, if you're not a fan of theatre in general, or Greek theatre in particular, there is one aspect of these performances which may leave even the most blasé of modern audience members in awe. And that was the incredible skill of actors to project their voices over long distances while maintaining comprehension and intelligibility of speech. That's a feat that, especially in Epidaurus, worked hand in hand with the admirable acoustics of the venue. Archaeologists, theatre scholars, and performers have all remarked upon the qualities such as clarity of speech at Epidaurus, claiming it is near pristine even when the cavea is filled with 14,500 people. The great soprano Maria Callas was a great fan of performing at Epidaurus for this reason. A 1989 guidebook reports that the acoustics are extraordinary, even on the back row at a distance of 59 meters for the center of the orchestra, where the tour guide whispers, tears a piece of paper, lights a match, drops a coin. All sounds are clearly audible. Extraordinary indeed. So what could be the secret of such acoustic qualities? In the 1st century BC, author Marcus Vitruvius Pollio believed clever architectural design to be the key. In his treatise De Architectura, he wrote, "Therefore, the ancient architects, following nature's footsteps, traced the voice as it rose and carried out the ascent of the theatre seats. By the rules of mathematics and the method of music, they sought to make the voices from the stage rise more clearly and sweetly to the spectators' ears." In other words, the concave shape of the amphitheatre could carry sound from the orchestra up to the last rows. There is some debate over why this is. Some argue that the orientation of the main axis of the theatre allows for the wind to blow mostly from the orchestra towards the cavea, gently ferrying the voices of actors to the spectators. But other scholars point out that the sound is just as crisp when the wind blows the other way. Others dismiss architecture and location altogether. Some believe the costume department should get a pay raise, since Greek actors would have worn masks which projected and focused their speech via special mouthpieces. And perhaps, as much as anything else, the sound is the result of the actors' and playwrights' hard work. The classical works performed at the festivals in Epidaurus had a distinctive rhythm of speech, highly intelligible for even the back row spectators. All these factors certainly help, but how about musical performances or contemporary productions? Neither make use of masks nor ancient rhythms of speech. In the 1990s, stage designer George Eisenhower returned to a structural theory. The acoustics of Epidaurus are so good because of the clear path between the speaker and the audience. So, well, case closed, right? Far from it. In the 21st century, the world of academia has sought to unlock the secret of sound quality at Epidaurus. The first investigation we're going to review today is the study by Nico de Klerk and Cindy de Keyser at the Georgia Institute of Technology. In a study published in January of 2007, they applied extensive diffraction theory to explain the conundrum. Diffraction describes the process taking place when waves, such as light or sound, bend around an obstacle. They reached the conclusion that the seat rows of the theatre play an essential role, at least least when the auditorium is not fully filled with spectators. According to them, seats constitute a corrugated surface which acts as a sort of giant acoustic filter. When sound is emanating from the stage, it passes undisturbed through the rows of seats, landing crisp and clear to the ears of the audience at the very back. But the acoustic filter blocks out all the annoying surrounding noises which inevitably harm the theatrical experience, the odd cough, shuffling of feet, or your friend who started snoring at the start of Act 2. De Klerk and De Keyser have also proved that the arrangement of seats in the cavea can amplify the high frequencies typical of the human voice, thus blocking out the low frequencies of background noise. In 2011, a duo of acoustic consultants from Athens partially corrected the seat theory of 2007. Soteris Parras and Mercurius Contoras have demonstrated that actually the presence of a full house does not affect the high intelligibility values recorded at the theatre. What does harm performance quality is plastics. The duo found that the use of plastic seating mats introduced in recent performances reduces speech intelligibility. These studies confirm that the structural layout of the theatre appears to be specifically designed to convey clarity of speech, but they have not proven those claims made by the 1989 guidebook. So, it's time to introduce the next academic team, led by Professor Konstantin Hack and researcher Remy Wenmaekers of Eindhoven University of Technology. The team brought to Epidaurus 20 microphones, placing each one at 12 different locations around the theatre. They then placed 2 loudspeakers in the orchestra and had them play sounds recorded in a laboratory, a coin dropping, a torn piece of paper, a whisper, a match being struck. In total, they made 2,400 recordings, a sizable dataset to calculate sound levels at different points of the cavea. Their findings proved that the sound of the coin and paper could be noticed above the background noise across the whole of the theatre, but only halfway up the cavea could the sounds be correctly identified. As per the match and the whisper, they could only be perceived in the front seats. The Eindhoven team also performed tests on the intelligibility of human voice. They revealed that speech was intelligible to the back rows only when the actors spoke up quite loudly. The 2017 research made the headlines in Europe. It seemed like Hack and team had debunked the myth of the perfect acoustics at Epidaurus. For sure, they certainly angered some tour guides. But the final verdict has not been signed off on yet. In 2018, the island of Crete hosted the 11th Euronoise, which sounds like an edgier version of Eurovision, but no, it's a Congress on Noise Control Engineering. One of the studies presented there was wave-based acoustic modeling of the Epidaurus Theatre, conducted by a team at the University of Patras, Greece. The study confirmed the conclusions from de Klerk and de Keyser. Diffraction, as a result of the seating position, plays a major role in the theatre's acoustics, assisting in carrying clear sounds, especially at the distant positions. The research then evaluated, among other variables, the STI, or Speech Transmission Index, again a measure of how clearly human speech can travel from the orchestra to the last member of the audience. The Patras researchers found that STI was excellent for a person speaking at 70 decibels of volume and acceptable even at 60 decibels. For reference, 60 decibels is the noise level of standard conversation. This is a pretty impressive sound projection and a partial refutation of the Eindhoven paper. But academic research on the theatre of Epidaurus is far from over. Contemporary studies can only evaluate the quality of the sound today, but they cannot tell us how the acoustics were back in the heyday of the festival of Asclepius. According to Armand D'Angour, professor of classics at the University of Oxford, there are many more variables to consider which may have influenced propagation of sound. For example, ancient Greeks may have used amplifying devices placed at strategic locations. Now, before you picture Aristophanes shredding on his lyre in front of a wall of Marshall amplifiers, let me clarify. These devices were probably hollow containers or vessels placed at strategic locations within the cavea. I guess the only way to conclude this diatribe is that the acoustics of the theatre can only be evaluated in person. We were only able to visit Epidaurus in the most cost-effective manner, our imagination. But if you've had the chance to see the theatre, or even better to attend a performance, let us know in the comments. And as always, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.